This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us a frequent visitor, Dr. Buck Melton, Professor Melton, and who is, among his many talents, is, I would say, an expert on the Constitution and also on impeachment issues. So you were there with the first Clinton impeachment, if I can recollect that. You
Rather
were
a loaded statement.
And assuming that Hillary is going to be our next president and is headed in that direction. And if not, well, we'll still have an interesting conversation about this. Right now, there are a lot of loaded pistols that still exist in regards to her behavior, in regards to her server and her ability to keep national secrets confidential and violating different kinds of legislation on that comment. And presumably the Republican Congress is going to be in the position to continue to ferret out the truth in regards to this. What would happen, and how would that process go forward? What would it take to provoke us into another national crisis? We have a lot of tension in the country. Presumably the Republicans will still be investigating things. How would that go down? I mean, what would be necessary to go through that again?
Yes, well, I guess I should preface my comments by saying that we are taping this on the eve of the election, one day after FBI Director Comey has once again apparently said not
Yes,
that
right,
he's
yes.
not going to recommend prosecution,
Okay,
and
all
one
right.
day before the actual election. Well, impeachment it's an A-bomb, but it's a very cumbersome A-bomb to use. The question, of course, perennially comes up, what is an impeachable offense? And the magic constitutional language is high crimes and misdemeanors. But that probably doesn't mean what the modern American ear hears. It doesn't mean what we would call felonies and misdemeanors. It's an ancient term of art which is not necessarily limited to indictable offenses. So you can, as Gerald Ford once said, that if you take his view of it, which was a very broad one, that an impeachable offense is whatever the House of Representatives thinks it is, together with what the Senate will actually convict for. And I think if you can say hatred of a member of the other party meets that standard, then yes, Hillary Clinton, and for that matter, Donald Trump, will be subject to impeachment from the moment they come into office.
So you're saying basically the statute is so broad that it could be a way just to correct the election. If a person said, well, you know, I don't really, we happen to control Congress, and we've got a great majority in Congress, and the other party has put their candidate in as president, and we don't like that. Maybe we can just veto the election just by impeaching the person for no particular reason other than we don't like the person, or we'll manufacture something. Any comments?
Well, there are a couple of interesting comments on that. First of all, you can make an argument, I've heard the argument made by reputable scholars, that impeachment originally would not have been seen as drastic a measure as it has turned out to be in American constitutional history. That before the Electoral College was modified after the election of 1800, the idea would be that you would have not just two parties in the running, but several different favorite sons getting a solid number of electoral votes from many different parts of the country, and that there would almost never be a single clear electoral majority. And when that happens, when you don't have someone winning the electoral vote outright with a majority vote, then the House of Representatives gets to decide among the three top vote getters. And there's a nice symmetry there with the House of Representatives using the impeachment power rather freely. So Now, that's not the way things have turned out. We got a party system with two candidates having the best shot at it. That means that you normally see someone get a majority electoral vote. And likewise, the impeachment power atrophied and didn't really get used very much at all, maybe 18 or 20 times in the last 200 plus years, and only 2 of those being of a president. But there's an additional problem as well, even if you see impeachment as an extreme matter. There's the impeachment and then there's the trial. And while the House of Representatives can impeach, which is a rough equivalent to indictment, can bring charges, it takes 2/3 of the Senate to vote a conviction. And in an era when we almost never see a single party having 66 seats in the Senate, it has to be something that clearly rises above partisanship to have any hope at all of a conviction. And we almost saw that during Watergate. We probably would have seen it had Nixon stayed in. I don't see that happening in the politically charged atmosphere we have today.
Well, so we're basically saying it would be very unlikely to have, well, I mean, whoever's elected impeached. It would be very difficult.
It'd be easy to impeach. It might not be so easy to convict.
Just so. It's tossed out of office, and then it would be difficult to imagine that. But
Yes.
what happens? Let's suppose we have a sitting president that has a criminal investigation underway, and I think the issue that might continue with Hillary Clinton. Presumably, the investigation goes forward. There's a substantial argument that maybe something that's happened is amiss and has violated appropriate. There are federal guidelines that have been violated. There are laws that have been broken, and the criminal charges are brought against her. She undergoes a trial with a jury impaneled, and then she's convicted and is sentenced to, I don't know, I'll make a number, 2 years in prison. I mean, that rather extraordinary set of circumstances. If something like that happened, could the person just, what would occur, I guess is the question. Can charges be brought against a sitting president, criminal charges? Or I think we've had a discussion with Tom Engel on the subject that in regards to civil charges, most judges would just put the complaints aside until after the election or after a new person went in. What would happen?
Yes.
Criminal charges against a sitting president.
Well, I'm not sure that criminal charges are something you could just hold in abeyance until after a president has finished his or her term of office. The problem being that the president is the top law enforcement officer of the country and oversees, of course, the Attorney General's office and the Department of Justice. And you can't have somebody, I think, under that kind of serious cloud, under indictment, continuing to exercise that role. You've either got to convict or acquit and get the person out from under the cloud. Impeachment law is perfectly clear that impeachment and indictment are 2 separate tracks. One does not influence the other. So, for instance, being found not guilty in a regular criminal case is no bar at all to being impeached. Being impeached and acquitted is no bar to subsequently being indicted.
Well, I guess what I'm getting into is some of the complexities that could happen.
Yes.
We hope nothing like this will occur, really for the country's sake. But if people said, okay, I'm going to, there are criminal charges out there, and we're going to, we're going to impanel a grand jury, we're going to bring criminal charges against a sitting president, and then that process was underway. Could President Obama, anticipating something like this in advance, pardon, assuming Hillary Clinton is the new president, pardon her in advance, or could she then pardon herself before the whole thing went down? She could say, "Well, I've decided this is political. These charges are totally false. The country's benefit needs to go forward. I'm pardoning myself." In comments, is that doable? Could you do that?
Point number 1: could President Obama, in his final lame duck weeks, pardon President-elect Clinton? And I don't see why not. And
this without any charges.
Without any charges whatsoever.
Could the president do that? Maybe you're
Ford
amiss.
and Nixon. Yeah.
Well, I mean, could you say, well, Bucky, maybe you've done something wrong, but I'm giving you a get out of jail card free in perpetuity? Would you be could you be pardoned for a specific thing, or just a general get out of jail card?
A general pardon, and I can even give you the rationale that Obama would use. There has been, in the public mind, if not in Director Comey's, in the public mind, serious questions as to whether or not Hillary Clinton has committed indictable criminal offenses, and yet there has been no indictment. And so Obama can say, we've got to put this behind us. The top law enforcement agency in America has said that it doesn't think that we should go forward this. So she needs to come in with a clean slate. So on my way out the door, I'm going to give the American people a gift of putting this to rest. And the rationale would be extremely similar to the announced rationale that Gerald Ford gave when he pardoned Nixon in advance of any criminal action. Now, can she pardon herself? Well, it's a long-standing view of the common law that a man cannot be a judge, or a woman for that matter, cannot be a judge in her own cause. And yet, the pardon is not really part of the judicial process. So by analogy, I would say that no, a sitting president is barred by principles of common sense and natural justice from pardoning himself or herself. But is there anything specifically barring that in the Constitution? I don't know of any.
Well, now, we've had a discussion actually with Tom Engel in regards to some of the nuances of the dispute that's presently afoot against Hillary Clinton. And the Justice Department is a necessary, I guess, component of criminal charges. So if the Justice Department just doesn't do anything, I mean, presumably that would be it. There would be no way to go forward. So a Congress could investigate whatever they wanted to investigate here, but the only action Congress could take would be to impeach presumably President Clinton, if that happened. That's the only action they could take, would be to impeach. They could not encourage any kind of criminal charges in a judicial setting, could they? I mean, the Justice Department would have to do it.
Yes, and by using or arguably misusing the concept of prosecutorial discretion, the Justice Department could say we're simply not going to go forward with this. Here's a scenario that you haven't brought up that is possible. Let us say that the House of Representatives the Republicans maintain control of the House of Representatives, which is highly likely, and let's say that the Senate even is kept by the Republicans as well at, say, 53 seats. That is well short of the 66 seats needed for conviction. I could imagine a scenario where the sore loser Republicans in the House of Representatives impeach President Hillary Clinton just for show, just to make the point that, well, you may have gotten away with it in the eyes of the FBI and the Justice Department, but the American people demand more accountability. And they may even be more inclined to impeach if they know for a fact that she won't be convicted, just as a type of grandstanding, just as a political statement.
Now, is it a simple majority to do that in the House? So
Yes.
It's simple majority,
Yes,
does it?
simple
That's a
majority.
simple majority, and so that's always a loaded gun, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
and you could imagine the constitutional crisis that would occur and the damage to the country just to cavalierly do something like that. I mean, it was very, comments, maybe not.
I'm not
You
sure
don't
it'd be
think
a crisis.
You don't think it would be? I think it's a pretty substantial issue if you
Yes.
just
well,
impeach a person, the president, for the sort of,
Yes.
you're a little angry. I'm just going to put you stop worrying about the country. You're going to
Yes.
have to worry about yourself now.
Well, there's no legal fallout. There is political fallout, and there's also fallout in terms of the Congress as having its attention diverted from lawmaking and its primary function to what is essentially a political show. Now the question is, where does the fallout land if the Republicans impeach Hillary without a serious hope of conviction? Does it fall on the Republicans the way it seems to have done when you see the government shutdowns because the Republicans would not vote on the continuing resolutions, or would it fall on the Democrat? Would it fall on Hillary and bring to the fore what she's done? Well, there's been so much publicity as to what she's done. I don't think that anything new could be brought out in an impeachment trial that we don't already know. Perhaps, perhaps the House investigators and managers could find something, but I think there would be more blowback against the Republicans than against President Clinton in that case.
Now, just considering what's transpired here, presumably, I mean, one doesn't know these things, but this great treasure trove of compromising documents has been discovered and by WikiLeaks, and there's been asserted the Russian intelligence agencies are involved with this, and they're being leaked ad seriatim, piece by piece, and it's having this, stirring the people up. But in some ways, the gunfire of the election is just disguising all that.
Yes.
So in some ways, maybe it's purgative, or assuming Hillary's elected president, it's purgative to just get all that stuff out there. I mean, everybody's heard the story. It's kind of like Whitewater or whatever, bills, whatever, all these issues. Getting the stuff out there in the electoral proceedings sort of then takes it off the table for a later period. But to get into this issue, suppose that we're in this new era where it's possible to basically discover all kinds of secret documents and then make them public. So presumably foreign intelligence agents could find something out there, and there would be a method to basically destabilize the country. Yes. By constantly putting, and everyone, I guess you could imagine, has some secret crimes they've committed or bad words they've used or
I'll speak for yourself.
Well, okay. No, I mean, whatever secret crimes. You stepped on your cat, whatever I don't know.
No man is a hero to his fellow.
Right. So, I mean, all the secret crimes is too strong a word, but something you've done that's amiss. And that if it's possible to discover all this and get it in front of the public, it could be kind of a difficult situation. And I wonder if a person says, well, I have all this information. It's my purpose to destabilize the U.S. and destabilize the next administration. I'm just going to episodically toss these zingers out there. They'll appear, whatever, I don't know, episodically, maybe President Clinton, I don't know what she might have done, stole some money in high school or whatever. I mean, these things are constantly appearing and then are ricocheting around. And there's really not any way to stop that, is there? I mean, comments about that, unless you're able to secure these
yes.
computer records better.
Well, I think indiscretions or common things that that anyone would do is one level, whereas the White House tapes, or in this case, the classified documents that got hacked, are quite another. The American people, I think, have not made up their minds. Do we expect a president who is an Olympian, who is larger than life, who is held to standards above the rest of us, or in the great Republican, the little r Republican tradition, do we see the president as one of us? And as one of us, the president is allowed to make a certain number of human mistakes. So I think that Hillary kicked a cat in high school is one thing, but what happens if the Russians did in fact, or the North Koreans did in fact hack her server? They've got the smoking gun in Watergate terms, and they deliberately wait to release that until after she has won the election and been inaugurated. Question number one, now that she is in charge of justice and derivatively in charge of the FBI, would she be willing to name a special prosecutor? Would Justice and the FBI renew the investigation, summon a grand jury, and actually carry out an indictment? Who knows? If the system's been compromised, if the system's integrity is up in the air, I don't know. Number two, would that be sufficient smoking gun, sufficient evidence to overcome partisanship in the Senate and perhaps lead to an impeachment conviction? I think that's possibly more likely. That's certainly the scenario that we had by the summer of 1974 after the case of United States versus Nixon, that it had moved beyond partisanship, and it was perfectly clear not only that the House was going to impeach, but that the Senate would convict.
Well, just to continue on the subject, one of the things that's happened in this electoral cycle is both candidates have slung such an extraordinary amount of mud and, shall we say, manure at each other that they've been tainted. I mean, and the person that traditionally the person going into the White House is allegedly the most powerful person on the planet, and the decisions that person makes, the country really needs, well, needs is the wrong word, but appropriately should imagine they're delivered in a high and lofty fashion and would support the opinion that represents the country. But if there's a contaminated personality in there, that's really going to weaken I guess, the national will of the country. And the political process seems to have accomplished that. Nobody has any illusions about either of these candidates. Their just general character has been so diminished by this electoral arrangement that they might be much less of an effective leader.
Yes. Well, we've had something like this situation before. We have had presidents who have had scandal-ridden administrations. Like, we keep coming back to Richard Nixon, but there was Warren G. Harding in the 1920s. There was Ulysses S. Grant, who was an excellent general, but as a politician, a total loss. You have gone beyond that. We have had presidents whose entree into the job was of questionable legitimacy. And in recent memory, the Democrats have made some of these claims regarding George W. Bush because of the election of 2000, or Rutherford B. Hayes, farther back in our history, coming in the highly disputed election, highly irregular election of 1876.
Stop Reconstruction.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the next level. Level one is a president of scandal-ridden. Question number two, a president of questionable legitimacy, 1876, 2000. And then there's the third level, and I'm very much fear that if we're not at this level, we're getting to it, in which the whole process, the government itself, as well as systemically the electoral process, is seen is to be of questionable legitimacy. When you have to ask the two candidates, will you accept the outcome, that raises, and I was in the studio when Tom Engel was offering a defense of that, and I think it was a very good defense, that if there's a question of impropriety in voting in one state, that's one thing. But if you've got somebody who's clearly a lopsided loser who says the system is rigged, the reason why 70% of the people voted against me was because there's been a compromise of the voting machines, you're edging towards revolution there. And some of I won't even say the word rhetoric, some of the serious questions that have been posed about the capabilities, about the moral fiber of these candidates, I think we've gone beyond 1876 and 2000 here, or we're in danger of it. And that's a scary prospect, that Americans are starting to doubt the legitimacy of the system itself because of the type of people it produces.
Well, let's discuss that a little bit. I mean, it appears to me that actually, if you look at different modes of human behavior, different personality types, there's a particular kind of person that would become a politician, and a particular kind of person that would want to be president. And you'd imagine a great deal of narcissism is tossed in there, and different kinds of personality. Almost a personality disorder. I'll toss that out. Close to it.
They meet several of the categories
close to
it.
And
yes.
the system, it's not as if the judicial temperament or the person that has the most emotional balance. Yes. That doesn't seem to be what it takes to get the job done. And I want to draw our attention to John F. Kennedy. Now, at least one can believe he had a lot of girlfriends. I think that seems to be out there. I mean, and also, at least the story is out there, that because of his Addisonian issues, he had very substantial health problems, and that he was taking all sorts of psychotropic medication to basically keep him going, and then he was on different kinds of amphetamines, and the Addisonian problem was causing substantial possible judgment issues. Well, the question I would ask is, if all of the facts that are present are out there, there's a way to discover all of the weaknesses and foibles of political leaders, and they're in the ether, they're out in the atmosphere, and the Foreign Intelligence Agency knows about them, and then they have a way to get those facts out there. It would certainly be possible to tremendously weaken the national fiber. I mean, you could imagine, well, people were trying to do something. I mean, our CIA was trying to stop Stalin. Well, and they were able to just say, well, this is Stalin hates his mother. And then it was just widely put out. It would really weaken the political interstices, the Soviet Union, and thus these agencies that have all these facts, the personnel facts, and a way to get that into the public discourse. It could really be rather crippling, could it not?
I'd like to add, since you were listing Kennedy's foibles, let's add a locker room talk to that. I've not heard that one brought up, but there's a pretty well documented situation in which he was saying some rather roughly worded things about columnist Arthur Kroc, which is very interesting. I think it's how you put it across. Was it Huey Long who accused one of his opponents of being a thespian and a heterosexual? and the way you
in Louisiana, that went the wrong way.
You insinuate these horrible. You
Yes.
make foibles sound like fatal flaws that disqualify you from fitness in the human race. And I would hope that if that's the wave of the future, that we would quickly become desensitized to it, and it's just they're doing it again. There you go again. That, after all, is what happened after the paradigm shift of the election of 1828, the race to the bottom, the mudslinging, the brass bands, the campaign buttons. So now, don't get me wrong. I think that this race to the bottom and the lowest common denominator that began in the 1828 election has not stood America in good stead. And yet it is business as usual, and any scandal that the American people may have felt about it at the beginning has long since faded away. I would hope that we would, and rather quickly, come to that point if the development that you mentioned doesn't.
Well, just to continue briefly on it, our European colleagues often chuckle at the eccentricities of American politics, and they particularly are forgiving about, I guess, the sexual activity, if one can say it. They're very quite forgiving, and they wouldn't even talk about it. But we have sort of I guess I'd say, faux Puritanism there in the country. I mean, the country seems to be being pretty liberal in many affairs. On the other hand, there is this sort of puritanical streak that's always been part of our national character, and the idea that some person is a lout and a bully and sexually assaultive, they're going past the 50-yard line, and there are lots and lots of cases of this, and that's out there, and there's no restraint about talking about these issues. That's going to have a substantial impact. I'm bringing up the idea of blackmail. I mean, and also the idea that any news media will always, the people knew about the Kennedy arrangements, I'm told, but then people said, well, this is a private affair. We're not going to mention this for national reasons. Yes. And that's off the table now, isn't it?
Yes, quite possibly. And everybody's after the next big story. So it raises a question of what would be bad enough. So, for instance, it was fine to be a member of the Klan 100 years ago.
Sure.
Now it's not. So that sort of thing would certainly, I think, disqualify you in the eyes of the vast majority of the American public. But it would change with the times. So
well, locker room talk, that's sort of my final comment here as we draw our discussion to a close. I would have to say locker room talk, it's my experience, certainly exists in locker rooms. And it's sort of a private, whatever you could say, it's bad, it's wrong, but nevertheless it occurs.
Yes.
And then some, I would be surprised, a person has either never said anything that's coarse or heard anything that's coarse as they go through their life. And if somebody has a record of that, then it could be blackmail. I mean, a person could be blackmailed for any indiscretion along those lines.
Well, indeed, and I mentioned this during the as you said at the beginning of the show, the first Clinton impeachment.
Yes.
What if one of Bill Clinton's women was an agent? And
right.
It can't be ignored.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Bucky.
Indeed.
It's been another good discussion tonight. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.